We have a failure, have a setback, we disintegrate, but then we build ourselves back up. And it's positive because we're building ourselves back up with this new ideas, new beliefs, new experience, and it becomes a more positive experience for us if we allow it to be.
Well, hello and welcome back to the Amanda Kaufman Show. And I am so excited because my very dear friend Chad Peevy is joining us on the show today. If you don't know Chad, you really should. He is the author of Broken and Untangled, and he is a genius. I just have to say he's a genius when it comes to people, their development, their psychology. And Chad, oh my gosh, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me, Amanda. It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. Oh my goodness. So Chad, you've been introducing me to a new idea, a new concept that I honestly hadn't heard of until you texted me about it. Why don't you take 30 seconds and explain to our dear listeners what it is you're working on these days?
I'm working on the idea of gifted adults. And as we've talked about, many of us were identified as gifted and talented children and went to our once a week in the library to do puzzles. And then we grow up and everyone thinks that because you're smart, that you should be okay. You're smart and therefore everything is going to work out in your life. We don't have to worry about you. But as I dive more and more into the research, what I'm finding is that is the opposite of that is true. Gifted adults handle life very differently than other folks. And there are some significant differences that we experience in adulthood that, in my opinion, need a lot more attention. As you and I have talked over the years, I find my life to be a little bit of a roller coaster emotionally, just dealing with a lot of stuff growing up a gay kid in rural Arkansas. And I wrote about all of that in Break and Untangle. And even in doing the mindset work, it was hard for me to, like, some of the things would work, but then they didn't work. And then I would get really frustrated because I would sort of spiral down and not really understand why. Well, I thought I'd figured that one thing out. And this was just this continuous cycle of being okay, figuring stuff out, and then sort of falling again. And none of that made sense to me until coming upon this idea of being a gifted adult. And as soon as I started reading and doing some research on gifted adults, everything just started clicking for me. Things just started making so much more sense when put through that lens. So that's what I'm working on.
That's so exciting. And, when you texted me this idea and you started sharing with me some of your preliminary research on it, it blew my actual mind because I was thinking about, of course, our friendship and our relationship. We've gotten to know each other really well over the years. So I was like, could be that, could be that, could be that, could be that. And I'm like running through this checklist. So it was like a revelation for me personally, but I also just noticed in a lot of the entrepreneurial circles that I travel in that I've just met so many who say like, oh, I go to the therapist, but I'm the one that in the last 5 minutes does the gotcha move. Right? Because they're smart. They're ready to anticipate what's going to happen in that environment. So they find therapy to typically not be terribly effective. And like even coaching can have limited utility for them because it's almost like they're too smart for their own good in some ways.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly
so
right.
Can you like
exactly how I would phrase that too.
Too smart for their own good, right? Yeah. So like, as you dug deeper and you started really looking at, and I know you dug really deep into this, what makes a gifted adult a gifted adult? Like, how do you know? Like, maybe you were a gifted child, but maybe you were never tested for gifted or not. Like, what are some of the signs or the tells that someone might be experiencing the gifted adult experience, I guess?
Yeah. So it's a really good question. It's a tricky one to answer. There's no definitive test or assessment that can tell you whether you're a gifted adult. That just does not exist. So I think what's missing for me, the reason it took me so long to relate to the ideas that I read in the research around giftedness is because we'd have so few mirrors put up for us about what giftedness looks like in adults. Giftedness, we started talking about giftedness in the early 1920s, mainly focused on kids. And over this 100 plus years of research on giftedness, less than 15% of that research has focused on adults. So there's hardly anything out there on the gifted adult experience. And so how do you know if you're gifted? You have to start listening to people who identify as gifted and seeing if their story relates to you. You have to start reading the very, very few books that exist for gifted adults and see if you relate to those ideas. So there's a process of relating to and finding mirrors that exist for us and see, does this fit? And if I can tell you in my case, and it sounds like in yours too, when I started reading about it just a little bit, it was just like click, 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 click. Like everything just started falling into place in my head. And so that's what I would say to anybody that's wondering, is this me? Does this fit? That's how I think we end up knowing. Some of the characteristics that we have as gifted adults is there are really two that stand out consistently across the research. The first one is we are perfectionist. So we see in our minds, we're able to see the ideal outcome, the ideal situation. And we live a lot of our lives frustrated because the ideal is not reality. And so we're constantly in this cycle of trying to, whether it's us, our relationships, I can go to a store and if the service is bad or their process is bad, I'm pissed off more than the average person because I see the way it should be. And I don't understand why they're not doing it the way it should be done. And so this is my life experience. It's just constant perfection, seeking out the perfect and failing. And then the other thing that is just an heightened sensitivities or heightened self-awareness. We're much more aware of ourselves than the average Joe, much more self-awareness going on. And there was a guy that talked about this, a psychologist, he's long dead, Dabrowski. He had a theory called the theory of positive disintegration. And a lot of giftedness research is based on this theory of positive disintegration, where he talks about, he was the first one to say that when we experience things like setbacks and go through this sort of depression or anxiety around the perfectionism or our inability to achieve perfectionism, that we sort of disintegrate. And he was the first one to say that maybe for some folks, that disintegration, that depression, that anxiety shouldn't be pathologized. We shouldn't just call it depression and give them a pill. We shouldn't pathologize what they're experiencing, but what they're experiencing is actually a required part of that person's development. So he talks about disintegrating in terms of ourself and our ideas and the things that are important to us. We have a failure, have a setback, we disintegrate, but then we build ourselves back up. And it's positive because we're building ourselves back up with this new ideas, new beliefs, new experience, and it becomes a more positive experience for us if we allow it to be. The tragedy is that so many of us don't have the guidance. We don't have mirrors in our society of giftedness. And so when we pull ourselves back up, we experience the negative sides of that rather than the positive opportunities that come with disintegration and rebuilding.
When you say like the really negative sides of the disintegration, what could that look like?
Say that again.
So this disintegration process, it's almost like, if I was to sum it up as I'm understanding it, it's like, as a gifted person, perhaps I have this ability to visualize my ideal or my perfection. And then I encounter reality. And then my heightened emotional experience causes that crumble, that anxiety and that depression to just like be a very eventful episode. Like it's not just disappointing. It's shattering because there's this reality expectation that you have, and then there's the real reality, right? And then it's like, ooh, disintegration. I'm almost visualizing it as like this fall apartness and this ability to build back up. And then when you're building back up, you're smarter and wiser. So because you're smarter and wiser, perhaps the next time you go to set that ideal, you have a different standard and expectation. But again, you kind of get caught in that cycle of idealism, facing that reality, and then crash.
100%.
Am I getting that right?
Yeah, I think that from my understanding of the research, that's pretty well said. And I think you're also hitting a note there when you said that we feel it more intensely. That's really the crux of giftedness, is the intensity that we're living. In fact, one of the few books on this topic is called Living with Intensity. And we just live with heightened sensitivities. Dabrowski called it our overexcitabilities. And so you're absolutely right. We experience a setback, and it's not just, oh, shucks, like we are a failure and we are never, one of the overexcitabilities is our active imaginations. Gifted people have usually, and again, you can't say that a gifted person has all the things. So not everybody's going to have an overactive imagination. Not everybody's going to be overly intellectual. Not everybody's going to have everything. But the things that you do have are going to be very, very heightened. And so, yeah, your emotional overexcitabilities are going to be working overdrive. It's not just it's not just a minor setback. And the flip side of that is also true. When something goes well, it's like we're euphoric. And this is why so many times that gifted people are misdiagnosed as bipolar. I've been asked more than a couple of times by new folks if I'm bipolar, and then after they're talking to me, they're like, "Oh yeah, you're not bipolar." But I can't blame them for initially thinking that, because I do have extreme highs and then I'll have extreme lows, and it's just back and forth, but it's not manic. It's just intensity. So there's very little, as I said, very little research on this. Practitioners, psychiatrists, therapists, coaches, they don't know about this. There's very, very little research on it. And that's one of the reasons that I'm so excited about this topic. It needs a good pitch man. Giftedness needs a good PR campaign to get folks to understand, from therapists and your general practitioners and your psychiatrists and your coaches need to know that people like this exist, that they're not what's called double depressed, or they're not manic depressive, or they're not bipolar. They're just living with intensity, and there are ways to help them through it that I'm finding in the research.
I love that. And, I think one of the reasons that I got so excited about talking about this with you and so let's do a podcast, right, was because that's been not just my own personal lived experience, but I've worked with so many really, really, I call them smart patooties, just like people who are very high achievers, but they have high intensity, like that intensity index, it's so high. And so the lows are really low, the highs are really high, but there's that fixation that they have with it, that it's not just like random. It's not random happiness or random sadness. It's like very, very intense. It is intense. I think intense is a great word for it. And so when you started to describe like what a gifted adult might experience and what it might be, I got so excited as a coach and practitioner, because I was like, maybe there's things that I can do to really meaningfully help, and not just have the observation of we've talked many times about this intelligence trap, where sometimes people are just, they're either so intense, or they're so smart, or they're so passionate that they aren't doing the basic things that allow them to get to that level of the functioning and whatever their goal is. And like, that's the trap. It's not that they're not capable. It's not that they're not intelligent. It's not that they don't care. It's like this block to doing the basics that gets in the way. And I am so excited about this. Like, let's just say somebody identifies as gifted, talented as an adult, or they feel like they're checking a lot of these boxes, kind of the way we found when we were talking. What next? Now that you know that, like, what actually changes?
For me, I think everything changed. Everything about how I was seen, how I was approaching life has completely changed. I think what changes first is a sense of being understood in a way that you've never felt understood in your entire life. I was a kid, in addition to just being a gay kid in rural Arkansas and feeling out of place, when I went to school and was able to be part of a gay community, I didn't even feel like I fit in there. And then that compounds that sense of loneliness and isolation that so many gifted people experience, because they think that it's between 1% and 5% of the population that would be considered gifted. So there are just fewer of us. And so it's very hard to feel seen, be seen, not feel lonely, not feel isolated. How could you not? So for me, what changed was, oh my God, there's a name for this. This is not just Chad, right? I think there's a part of going through my life where it's just like, oh, that's just how Chad is. And as long as that's how Chad is, that's Chad bearing a lot of responsibilities for things that Chad could have never helped. And now that I have a label for it, it's like, oh, that's not just you. That's what this thing does to people like you. This is what it means to live with this thing. So for me, just being seen and having an understanding of what's going on has changed everything for me. And then for me, it has been diving into the research on what this means and looking at some new tools that are helping me understand how I experience the world, but also going back and looking at some old tools and being like, this is why this one thing is really important for me. To your point, skipping over the fundamentals. Smart people get very bored with the fundamentals. That's why they don't
Yes,
do it.
that's true.
It's boring, right? They see the empire that's possible and want to jump into the empire without doing, putting the first cobblestone down, because putting the first cobblestone down is really freaking boring. And that's why so many of them end up in entrepreneurship, is because they get very, very bored with mundane things. So now, how do I think about that? Okay, well, if you want to build the empire as an entrepreneur, you do need to go back to the fundamentals. But now I can go back to the fundamentals knowing that there's this thing that's going to inside of you that's not going to want you to do the fundamentals, which is why you have to be more intentional about doing things like, for me, time blocking. Just time block. Just do simple little things that are going to help you stay on track and help you navigate the mundane parts of the human experience. Be more intentional in planning that out so that I'm better able to tolerate it. I don't know if that answers your question as pointedly as you would like. Those are the couple of things that I'm thinking about.
It really does answer the question because, I love a good personality assessment. I like to know myself better. I'm big into personal development, but I do appreciate you lining out a little more of like the so what, now what of the gifted adult conversation, right? Because I especially feel in this day and age, we have this tendency to label stuff, right? We have this tendency to just sort of say, oh, it's this issue or this problem. And then it's like the conversation just stops. It's like, I've got this explanation. And I really appreciate you kind of going through like, and so therefore we can do something with this information. I noticed in myself, like, as you laid out some of that research for me and I'm reading through first of all, you caught my attention, like I was reading through all of the different nitty gritty details of what you shared with me. And I was having the same sort of like, oh my gosh, moments where there were so many moments in my own life where I was confused as to like why certain things were happening, why was I having such a response and it felt like no one cared.
Yes.
Right? No one around me was like activated by it. And I was like, well, maybe I'm just like a hypersensitive human. And the problem that I have with like just labeling things is like, but now what? Like if I'm just going to be sensitive all the time, right? What do I do about that? And, I think it can be really confusing, especially if you're somebody that has a lot of aspirations and you do desire to do things that require, for example, leadership. Like this has been a big thing that has occurred to me in the last few years is like to be a great leader means a lot of emotional regulation. It means, having, we've talked a bit about like this idea of psychological discipline that is not my natural way. My natural way is all over the place. I'm like ideating. Today, I'm actually very happy because I'm completely exhausted. So it's slowed my brain down and I'm like, it's a little bit of a relief. But then at the same time, it's like, well, if I'm only going to get relief by being robbed of sleep last night, then what kind of quality of life am I going to be able to expect for myself? How can I build something where I'm able to be that kind of, I'm snapping my fingers a lot to represent like just, I am thinking about a lot of things all at the same time, even when I'm practicing incredible presence. And when I was reading that research, I was like, I was never tested as a gifted kid, but I'm sure if you were to ask my mom, she'd be like, yeah, well, you would have been if I grew up somewhere else. But that was actually one of the reasons she homeschooled me was I did correspondence learning for 4 years. And it was in large part because I was just cranking through the curriculum to the point where the teacher like had so many special projects that I was working on. She didn't really know what to do with me. Right. Yeah. And so, no wonder years later, it's like, maybe you still have a lot of energy that you want to put towards things. Maybe you still struggle with some of the, social challenges and the bullying and wanting to fit in and never, ever fitting in.
Yeah. That's very, very common stuff with gifted adults. I think it's also important for your listeners to know it doesn't ever go away. The research that I'm reading and exploring on this says that it's never going to go away. You are going to be snapping your fingers to express ideas because your mind is going so much faster than your mouth can possibly articulate what you're thinking. And this is going to be your entire life experience. So right now I'm writing a book and I'm outlining the chapters that I want to include as I go through the research. And one of them is old age, giftedness in old age, because gifted people's old age looks very, very different than what we're accustomed to seeing aging look like. And I think that's just a fascinating topic that we're all going to have to deal with. And back to your point about labeling, Amanda, I think one of the things that has helped me in having a label, specifically on perfectionism. So this is a really tangible way of thinking about, or practical way of thinking about perfectionism. Now that I know that that's something I'm living with and I'm going to have to live with for the rest of my life, I can bring more intention and distinction to where I apply that perfectionism. So I can engage coaches or a therapist or just a support community, which is incredibly important for people who are gifted. That's sort of the antidote to all of it. I'm finding is finding like-minded people to just be in community with. But, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, you and I were having a conversation and you were like, don't spend time on that thing. And I pushed back on you because I'm like, well, that's the thing that really matters to me. And gifted folks get to a place in their development where I should say, that money no longer is the driving force, that the driving force is the meaning and the purpose and fulfilling your potential, because that's part of it, is you have so much potential and you want to realize that potential. And so even if it doesn't become a commercial success, it really means a lot to me to do that one thing. And so that's what for me, having a label has helped with, is being able to look at what goes along with that and then bringing distinction to, all right, I know it's a thing. I'm going to be more discerning in where I apply that thing. And I have a choice about where I apply it. And being a perfectionist is actually a superpower when applied properly and knowing when to let it go. So yeah, that's what
it's hard. I mean, I've literally tattooed on my arm, let it go.
Let it
right?
go. Yeah.
And that was before I knew about any of this gifted stuff. But seriously, I'm resonating so much with what you're saying around the perfectionism piece, because when I think about, what stops me, what keeps me from going further, faster, it is for freaking sure maladaptive perfectionism. And, I love your solution of just like, let's put boundary on that, or let's at least have discernment on that,
Yes.
of just being able to say, well, I know that on one hand, maybe I want to monetize this idea, but on the other hand, it's really important to me that it's at this particular level of standard. But then on the other hand, I know I've got like a deadline that I'd like to start seeing results by. And so it empowers you to start having that conversation about, okay, I am perfecting. I am not perfect before I start. I am perfecting. So when can I let that thing squeak out into the world so that I can start getting the feedback loops going so that I can actually actively perfect it? Because there's still like something yummy about making something really, really great. And so It's almost, I think about it like you're shifting the care, you're shifting the focus to like post-release or forcing a release of different stages of things so that you can actually actively perfect it. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah. So you're writing a book. You got anything else cooking about gifted adults these days?
I created a very comprehensive assessment to help folks identify different parts of their giftedness. It's like 10 sections long. There are 350 questions on this assessment. It really dives into a lot of what's going on in this very rich inner life that you're experiencing, and helps make sense of it and does a lot of what you're talking about. Okay, here it is. Now, what can you do with this? So I've been working on that, working on the book, and just getting all the things going.
Love it. That's so good. And so if people wanted to learn more from you and keep up with you, what's the best way to do that?
Go to giftedadult.com. When you get there, there will be a very short 12-question quiz that will help you identify some of the symptoms or evidence of giftedness. Take that. It will spit out a result for you to, not as a diagnosis, but to open up some more questions for you to explore. And that will also subscribe you to my newsletter on this topic, which is called The G Word. And that will put you on an email sequence there's several emails that you'll be getting that will help you every day think a little bit more about this idea of giftedness and seeing if you relate to that and if that applies. And if so, what can you do about that?
Just tremendous. So, so good. And I just want to like asterisk and footnote here for everyone. Like if you're listening to this and you're like, that's why I've been, feeling emotional experience here. I always advocate, and I want to remind you again, like have a team, consider working with a therapist, consider working with a coach, consider working with your doctor on what your real experience is day to day. I think that isolationism, especially, that's not just limited to gifted and talented adults. That is a real experience that a lot of people are faced with. So I just really want to urge you that if you're feeling like you need to talk to somebody, then that means you do. And so you should definitely find somebody that you trust, that you can speak to, and you can start enrolling a support team, whether you identify as gifted and talented or not. But perhaps you just got another idea about what could be going on in your experience that you can activate some more learning around and get to know yourself even better and improve your quality of life, which is what we're all about here. So that is awesome. Chad, thank you so much for joining us on this episode.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And dear listener, don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment, or even better, share a review, because it helps people to choose this episode when they're choosing what to listen to on the podcast. And if you have a gifted and talented friend that you think would really benefit from this conversation, just grab the link to the episode and shoot it over to them on text or DM. I'm sure they'd appreciate it. All right, dear listener, we'll see you next time. And until then, do what matters.